What happens when a single father's military training collides with corporate espionage in the most unexpected way? Marco Rodriguez thought his biggest challenge was balancing late-night security shifts with school pickup duties for his 8-year-old daughter Emma. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. He never imagined that his Special Forces background would expose one of Phoenix's most powerful CEOs as a corporate spy, leading to a reward so extraordinary it would change their lives forever. This is a story about courage hidden in plain sight, secrets that run deeper than anyone suspected, and how sometimes the most ordinary moments reveal the most extraordinary truths. Marco Rodriguez adjusted his security badge as he walked through the gleaming marble lobby of Phoenix Tech Solutions at exactly 5:47 a.m., the same time he'd arrived every morning for the past 6 months. The building towered 32 stories above downtown Phoenix, its glass facade reflecting the desert sunrise in brilliant orange streaks that reminded him of dawn patrols in Afghanistan, though he tried not to think about those days anymore. His black combat boots, now polished for corporate environments rather than desert sand, moved silently across the pristine floors with the practiced stealth that 8 years in Special Forces had burned into his muscle memory. Other employees wouldn't start arriving for another 2 hours, which gave him the solitude he preferred for his morning security rounds. The quiet allowed him to think about Emma, probably still asleep in her small bedroom in their cramped 2-bedroom apartment 15 minutes away, where his neighbor, Mrs. Chen, would check on her before school. At 34 years old, Marco had learned to navigate the delicate balance between his military instincts and civilian life. His weathered hands, scarred from countless missions and now calloused from security work, carried the same alertness that had kept his unit alive in hostile territory. But instead of scanning for IEDs and enemy combatants, he now watched for corporate thieves and unauthorized personnel in a world of quarterly reports and board meetings that felt almost as foreign as the mountains of Kandahar. The night shift supervisor had briefed him about yesterday's unusual activity on the 28th floor, where Phoenix Tech's research and development team worked on classified government contracts. Someone had been accessing secure files after hours, triggering alerts that the IT department couldn't explain. Marco's job was to maintain extra vigilance during his rounds, though his colleagues had no idea that his definition of vigilance had been shaped by situations where missing details meant the difference between life and death. As he approached the executive elevator bank, Marco noticed something that would have escaped the attention of any civilian security guard. The magnetic card reader on the restricted access panel showed microscopic scratches around the insertion slot, the kind of wear pattern that suggested someone had been using it frequently with slightly trembling hands or in poor lighting conditions. His trained eye cataloged the evidence automatically, filing it away with the same systematic precision he'd once used to track insurgent movement patterns. The elevator whispered open on the 28th floor, revealing the sprawling research wing where Phoenix Tech developed cutting-edge surveillance software for military applications. Marco had read enough briefing materials during his security training to understand that the technology being created in these labs could revolutionize intelligence gathering for American forces overseas. The irony wasn't lost on him that a former Special Forces operator was now protecting the very innovations that might have saved lives during his deployment years. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Walking through the maze of cubicles and secure workstations, Marco's enhanced situational awareness picked up details that seemed insignificant, but created a pattern his military training wouldn't let him ignore. A coffee cup still warm on an ostensibly empty desk, computer monitors that had been recently wiped clean but showed faint fingerprint smears around the edges, file cabinets with locks that appeared to have been professionally picked rather than damaged by amateur attempts. But it was the scent that triggered his deepest military instincts, barely perceptible but unmistakable to someone trained in covert operations. The faint trace of a specific type of electronic cleaning solvent used to remove fingerprints from sensitive equipment, mixed with high-end perfume that suggested someone with expensive tastes and professional training in evidence removal. Marco paused beside the window overlooking downtown Phoenix, his reflection ghost-like in the glass as early morning commuters began filling the streets below. Emma would be waking up soon, probably wondering if he'd remembered to pack her favorite strawberry yogurt in her lunchbox. She'd been asking more questions lately about why they lived in such a small apartment when other kids' fathers had bigger houses and better cars. How could he explain that some choices in life weren't about money or ambition, but about finding peace after seeing too much darkness in the world? His radio crackled to life, the security dispatcher's voice cutting through the silence. "Rodriguez, we need you to escort Ms. Wellington to her office. She's arriving early for an international conference call." Marco acknowledged the request, checking his watch. Sarah Wellington, the CEO of Phoenix Tech Solutions, typically didn't arrive until 8:30. An early morning visit suggested either urgent business or something that required privacy from the regular office staff. As Marco made his way back to the main lobby, he found himself thinking about the strange pattern of evidence he'd discovered on the 28th floor. His Special Forces training had taught him that coincidences were rare in professional environments, and successful operations usually involved someone with inside access and sophisticated knowledge of security systems. The question wasn't whether corporate espionage was happening at Phoenix Tech, but who had the skills, access, and motivation to pull it off without detection. The lobby elevator chimed softly as Sarah Wellington emerged, her presence commanding immediate attention even in the empty atrium. At 38, she carried herself with the confident authority of someone who had built a technology empire through intelligence and strategic thinking. Her tailored navy suit probably cost more than Marco's monthly salary, but what caught his attention wasn't her expensive clothes or perfectly styled auburn hair. It was the way she moved through the space with the same unconscious situational awareness he'd seen in intelligence operatives, her eyes automatically cataloging security cameras and exit routes, with professional precision rather than casual observation. "Good morning, Mr. Rodriguez," she said, her voice warm but carrying an undertone that suggested she knew more about him than his personnel file would typically reveal. "I appreciate you coming in early to escort me upstairs. I have some sensitive materials to review before the regular staff arrives." As they rode the elevator to the 32nd floor executive suite, Marco noticed that Sarah's reflection in the polished steel doors showed the same alertness he'd learned to recognize in fellow soldiers. Her hands remained relaxed but positioned for quick movement, and her breathing pattern indicated someone comfortable with high-stress situations. When the doors opened, she thanked him with genuine warmth, but her eyes held a calculating intelligence that made Marco wonder exactly what kind of conference call required this level of security and privacy. Walking back to his security station, Marco couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully ordered civilian life was about to intersect with skills he'd hoped never to use again. Emma was counting on him to provide stability and safety, but his instincts were telling him that both might be threatened by secrets hidden within the walls of Phoenix Tech Solutions. 3 weeks after that first early morning encounter, Marco's suspicions had crystallized into certainty through a series of small discoveries that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. His nightly security rounds had become methodical intelligence-gathering operations, driven by instincts honed through years of counterintelligence work in combat zones where overlooking details meant casualties. The breakthrough came on a Thursday night when Marco discovered Sarah Wellington's executive office wasn't as empty as it appeared. Hidden behind a false panel in her mahogany bookshelf accessible only through a biometric scanner disguised as a decorative bronze sculpture, was a sophisticated communication setup that had nothing to do with Phoenix Tech's legitimate business operations. The equipment was military-grade, the kind used by intelligence agencies for encrypted communications with foreign contacts. Marco had found the hidden compartment purely by accident, while investigating a motion sensor alert on the 32nd floor. His Special Forces training in building searches had taught him to recognize when spaces didn't match their architectural blueprints, and Sarah's corner office had subtle inconsistencies that suggested concealed areas. The bookshelf's depth didn't align with the external wall measurements, and the bronze sculpture's positioning created an unusual electromagnetic signature that his handheld security scanner had detected during routine sweeps. Inside the hidden compartment, Marco found documentation that made his blood run cold. Sarah Wellington wasn't just the CEO of Phoenix Tech Solutions. She was a deep-cover operative working for a foreign intelligence service, systematically stealing classified military technology that Phoenix Tech developed under government contracts. The evidence was meticulously organized in waterproof folders, including photographs of secure documents, copied hard drives containing classified software, and detailed dossiers on American military personnel who would be vulnerable if this information reached enemy hands. But the most chilling discovery was a thick file marked with Emma's school photograph and their apartment address. Sarah had been conducting surveillance on Marco and his daughter for months, documenting their daily routines, Emma's school schedule, and even details about Mrs. Chen's babysitting arrangements. The file contained professional quality photographs taken with telephoto lenses, showing Emma walking to school, playing at the neighborhood park, and sitting in their apartment window doing homework. Marco's hands trembled as he photographed the evidence with his phone, his military training warring with parental terror. Sarah had identified him as a potential threat to her operation, probably recognizing his special forces background through databases that civilian security companies weren't supposed to access. The surveillance on Emma wasn't random. It was leverage, a way to ensure his silence if he discovered her activities. The implications hit him like physical blows as he carefully returned everything to its original position. Sarah's early morning visits, her unusual knowledge of his background, even her friendly conversations during security escorts had been calculated moves in a larger strategy. She'd been studying him, assessing whether he posed a threat to her espionage operation while simultaneously gathering intelligence she could use to control him if necessary. Marco's phone buzzed with a text message from Mrs. Chen, a routine good-night update about Emma finishing her homework and brushing her teeth before bed. The normal domestic detail felt surreal against the backdrop of international espionage, and the very real danger his daughter now faced because of his accidental discovery. Every parental instinct screamed at him to grab Emma and disappear, using his military contacts to find new identities and a safe place to start over. But his special forces training reminded him that running would only confirm Sarah's suspicions and potentially make them targets for elimination, rather than mere surveillance. Professional intelligence operatives didn't leave loose ends, especially when those loose ends involved classified technology that could compromise national security operations. Marco needed to think strategically, using his military experience to outmaneuver someone who had been planning this operation for years. Over the following days, Marco began conducting his own covert investigation while maintaining the appearance of a routine security guard going about normal duties. His military intelligence training had taught him surveillance techniques that civilian corporate environments weren't designed to detect, allowing him to monitor Sarah's activities without triggering the sophisticated countermeasures she'd undoubtedly implemented. He discovered that Sarah's espionage operation was far more extensive than the hidden office equipment had initially suggested. She maintained regular contact with handlers through an encrypted messaging system built into Phoenix Tech's own communication servers, hidden within legitimate business correspondence through steganographic techniques that embedded secret messages in routine email attachments. Her office meetings with foreign business partners weren't just about international expansion. They were intelligence handoffs disguised as corporate negotiations. The most damaging revelation came when Marco accessed security footage from the research and development floors during Sarah's after-hours visits. Using his clearance to review archived recordings, he watched her systematically photographing classified documents, copying files onto encrypted drives, and installing hardware devices that would provide remote access to Phoenix Tech's most sensitive systems. She moved through the secure areas with the confidence of someone who had memorized every camera angle and security protocol, her actions precise and professional. Marco realized that Sarah's entire corporate identity was likely fabricated, a legend created by foreign intelligence services and maintained through years of careful identity construction. Her Harvard MBA, her previous executive positions, even her American citizenship might be sophisticated forgeries backed by the kind of resources that only nation-states could provide. The woman he'd been greeting politely during morning security escorts was essentially an enemy combatant operating on American soil. The personal files hidden in her office revealed the extent of her psychological profiling on Phoenix Tech employees. Sarah had identified several potential assets among the research staff, using detailed personality assessments to determine who might be vulnerable to recruitment through financial pressure, blackmail, or ideological manipulation. She'd been building a network of unwitting collaborators, employees who provided information without realizing they were compromising national security. But Marco's file was different from the others, marked with red flags that indicated active surveillance and contingency planning. Sarah had recognized his military background as a potential threat to her operation, but she'd also identified Emma as his critical vulnerability. The surveillance photos were accompanied by detailed psychological profiles that analyzed his protective instincts and predicted his likely responses to various scenarios involving his daughter's safety. The tactical assessment was coldly professional, outlining how Marco's special forces training made him dangerous but his parental responsibilities made him controllable. Sarah had been preparing to leverage Emma's safety to ensure his silence if he discovered her activities, using the oldest intelligence technique in the world, threatening someone's family to guarantee compliance with operational security. Marco spent sleepless nights staring at his ceiling, knowing that Sarah believed she held all the advantages in this deadly game of chess. She had years of preparation, sophisticated resources, and what she assumed was perfect leverage over his cooperation. But she had underestimated one crucial factor. His Special Forces training hadn't just taught him how to follow orders and complete missions. It had taught him how to think like an operator, how to turn apparent weaknesses into strategic advantages, and how to protect innocent lives against overwhelming odds. Emma remained completely unaware of the danger surrounding their quiet civilian life, continuing her routine of school, homework, and bedtime stories as if the world hadn't shifted beneath their feet. But Marco watched her with new intensity, memorizing every detail of her expressions and mannerisms, while planning how to protect her from threats she couldn't imagine. The weight of his discovery pressed down on him, like the crushing responsibility he'd felt leading soldiers in combat situations where wrong decisions meant casualties. But this time, the stakes weren't just military objectives or strategic advantages. This time, the enemy had targeted his daughter, and Marco knew that his response would determine whether Emma lived to see her 9th birthday or became collateral damage in an espionage operation that stretched far beyond Phoenix Tech's gleaming corporate facade. Sarah's greatest mistake had been assuming that a single father working security shifts would be too overwhelmed by civilian responsibilities to pose a serious threat to her carefully planned operation. She had no idea that she'd just activated a Special Forces operator whose protective instincts, tactical training, and access to military resources were about to turn her own surveillance operation against her in ways she couldn't anticipate or control. The confrontation Marco had been dreading arrived on a rain-soaked Friday evening when Sarah Wellington requested his personal escort to the parking garage after what she claimed was an emergency board meeting. The timing felt deliberately orchestrated, occurring exactly 48 hours after Marco had photographed the contents of her hidden compartment, suggesting that her surveillance equipment had detected his unauthorized access despite his careful precautions. As they descended in the executive elevator, Marco's heightened awareness cataloged every detail of Sarah's demeanor. Her usual confident posture carried new tension, and her breathing pattern indicated someone preparing for a difficult conversation or potentially dangerous encounter. When she pressed the button for the basement-level parking garage instead of the ground-floor main exit, Marco understood that this wasn't a routine security escort, but a calculated confrontation in an isolated location where their conversation wouldn't be monitored by building security systems. The parking garage stretched into shadows beyond the reach of overhead fluorescent lighting, creating pools of darkness between concrete pillars that could conceal additional personnel or surveillance equipment. Marco's tactical instincts automatically mapped potential cover positions and escape routes while maintaining the outward appearance of a security guard performing standard duties. His radio remained functional, but the basement location would limit response times if the situation escalated beyond verbal confrontation. Sarah's high heels clicked against the polished concrete floor as she led him toward her reserved parking space, her pace measured and deliberate rather than hurried. When she reached her silver BMW sedan, she turned to face him with an expression that had abandoned all pretense of corporate politeness, revealing the calculating intelligence that had been hidden beneath her executive persona for months. "Mr. Rodriguez," she began, her voice carrying the authoritative tone of someone accustomed to controlling conversations through superior information and strategic positioning. "I believe we need to discuss your recent activities during the overnight security shifts. Specifically, your unauthorized exploration of restricted areas that fall outside your assigned patrol routes." Marco maintained steady eye contact while his peripheral vision monitored the garage for signs of backup personnel or escape routes being blocked. His Special Forces training had prepared him for interrogations conducted by hostile intelligence operatives, though those had typically occurred in foreign territory rather than corporate parking garages in downtown Phoenix. The principles remained identical: reveal nothing, gather information, and maintain operational flexibility until the situation developed further. "I'm not sure what you're referring to, Ms. Wellington," Marco replied carefully, using the measured tone that projected calm professionalism, while concealing his growing certainty that this conversation would determine whether he and Emma survived the next 24 hours. My security rounds follow the route specified in the duty manual, and I document any irregularities through standard incident reports. Sarah's smile carried no warmth as she reached into her designer handbag, her movements slow and visible to demonstrate that she wasn't retrieving a weapon, but something potentially more dangerous, evidence that could destroy his carefully constructed civilian life. She withdrew a tablet device displaying high-resolution photographs that Marco recognized with sinking certainty as images from her hidden office compartment, showing him examining documents and equipment that officially didn't exist. These photographs were taken by motion-activated cameras positioned throughout my office. Sarah explained with the patient tone of someone who held overwhelming tactical advantages and could afford to be generous with information. The equipment uses infrared technology that functions effectively in complete darkness, and the images are automatically transmitted to secure servers that maintain permanent records of all unauthorized access attempts. Marco studied the photographs with the detached analysis that military training had taught him to apply to intelligence gathered by enemy operatives. The images clearly showed his face in security uniform, along with timestamps that correlated with his shift schedules and patrol logs. Sarah had documented his discovery of her espionage operation with the same methodical precision she applied to stealing classified technology, creating evidence that could end his career and potentially result in criminal charges for unauthorized access to executive areas. More importantly, Sarah continued, sliding the tablet back into her handbag while maintaining steady eye contact, I have additional surveillance footage that might interest you. Images showing your daughter Emma walking to school, playing at the neighborhood park, and sitting in your apartment window doing homework. Beautiful little girl, by the way. She looks remarkably like her father. Quote, the threat was delivered with casual precision, designed to trigger his protective instincts, while demonstrating that Sarah held leverage extending far beyond his employment at Phoenix Tech. Marco's hands remained relaxed at his sides, but his mind was already calculating response options that ranged from immediate evacuation procedures to more permanent solutions that would neutralize the threat to Emma's safety. What exactly do you want from me? Marco asked, abandoning any pretense that this conversation was about routine security matters. His Special Forces training had taught him that acknowledging the real stakes often provided more information than continuing elaborate deceptions that had already been compromised by superior intelligence gathering. Sarah leaned against her BMW with the casual confidence of someone who believed she controlled every variable in the current situation. I want your cooperation in maintaining operational security regarding information you may have accidentally discovered during your security duties. Phoenix Tech conducts sensitive research under government contracts, and unauthorized disclosure of classified materials carries serious legal consequences that extend to family members who might be considered security risks. The phrasing was carefully constructed to sound like legitimate corporate security concerns while actually outlining the parameters of her blackmail operation. Sarah was offering him a choice between cooperation and consequences that would devastate both his future and Emma's safety. Her intelligence background had taught her to present threats as reasonable business propositions, making resistance appear irrational rather than heroic. Marco nodded slowly, projecting the appearance of someone who understood the stakes and was preparing to accept terms that favored his opponent's operational requirements. I assume this cooperation involves specific duties beyond my current security responsibilities? Nothing too demanding, Sarah replied with false reassurance. Occasional modifications to your patrol routes, temporary adjustments to security equipment in certain areas, and periodic reports about employee activities that might indicate security concerns. Simple tasks that any competent security professional could handle without attracting attention from supervisors or colleagues. The requests sounded routine, but Marco recognized them as classic intelligence tasking designed to transform him into an unwitting asset within Phoenix Tech's security apparatus. Sarah wanted him to provide access, disable protective measures, and monitor potential threats to her espionage operation, effectively turning him into a collaborator in the theft of classified technology that could compromise American military operations worldwide. And if I decline this opportunity? Marco asked, knowing that Sarah's answer would reveal how far she was prepared to escalate the situation beyond professional threats. Sarah's expression hardened with the cold calculation that Marco had seen in enemy combatants, who were prepared to use any means necessary to achieve their objectives. Then you would face serious consequences for unauthorized access to classified materials, while your daughter would unfortunately find herself in various dangerous situations that single fathers often struggle to prevent. Playground accidents, traffic incidents, problems with strangers who take inappropriate interest in young children walking alone to school. The threat was explicit enough to leave no doubt about Sarah's intentions, while remaining vague enough to provide plausible deniability if their conversation was somehow being recorded. She was threatening to murder his daughter unless he cooperated with an espionage operation that could cost American lives in current combat zones where soldiers depended on secure communications and protected intelligence. Marco felt the familiar cold clarity that had descended during the most dangerous moments of his military service, when split-second decisions determined whether his unit survived enemy contact or became casualties of superior positioning and overwhelming firepower. But this time, the stakes weren't just military objectives or strategic advantages. This time, Emma's life hung in the balance, and his response would determine whether she lived to celebrate her 9th birthday or became collateral damage in an intelligence operation that had been planned for years. "I need some time to consider your proposal," Marco said finally, using the neutral tone that projected cooperation while concealing his actual intentions. "This is obviously a significant decision that requires careful thought about all the implications for my family's future." Sarah smiled with genuine satisfaction, interpreting his response as surrender rather than strategic maneuvering. "Of course. Take the weekend to think it over. But remember, Mr. Rodriguez, that time-sensitive opportunities rarely remain available indefinitely. I'll expect your answer first thing Monday morning, along with your first report about any unusual activities you might have noticed among the research and development staff." As Sarah drove away into the rain-soaked Phoenix night, Marco stood alone in the parking garage and felt the weight of decisions that would determine whether his daughter survived to adulthood. Sarah believed she had cornered him through superior planning and overwhelming leverage, but she had made one critical error in her tactical assessment. She had assumed that threatening Emma would make him controllable, when in reality, it had just activated a special forces operator whose protective instincts and combat experience were about to transform her carefully orchestrated blackmail operation into the most dangerous mistake of her intelligence career. Marco spent the weekend implementing a counterintelligence operation that drew upon every skill he'd acquired during 8 years of Special Forces service, transforming his small apartment into a command center for exposing Sarah Wellington's espionage network while protecting Emma from retaliation. His military contacts proved invaluable, connecting him with federal agents who specialized in corporate espionage cases and understood the delicate balance between gathering evidence and maintaining operational security. Agent Jennifer Hayes from the FBI's Counterintelligence Division arrived at Marco's apartment Sunday evening, her credentials impressive but her demeanor refreshingly straightforward. She reviewed the photographs and documentation Marco had gathered with the professional appreciation of someone who understood the risks he'd taken to obtain actionable intelligence about foreign operations on American soil. Her team had been investigating suspicious technology transfers from several defense contractors, and Marco's evidence provided the missing pieces that connected Phoenix Tech to a broader espionage network. The federal operation required Marco to continue working at Phoenix Tech while wearing sophisticated surveillance equipment that would document Sarah's activities and record any incriminating conversations. His security badge was modified to include a miniature camera and microphone, while his apartment was equipped with secure communication devices that allowed real-time coordination with the FBI surveillance team positioned throughout downtown Phoenix. Emma remained completely unaware of the dangerous game unfolding around her daily routine, continuing to attend school and complete homework assignments while federal agents provided invisible protection during her walks to and from the neighborhood elementary school. Marco watched his daughter's innocent trust in their normal life with a mixture of fierce protectiveness and growing determination to eliminate the threats that had invaded their peaceful civilian existence. Monday morning's confrontation with Sarah occurred exactly as she had scheduled. In her executive office, where hidden recording devices would capture every word of what she assumed would be Marco's surrender to her blackmail demands. Her confidence was evident as she gestured for him to sit across from her mahogany desk, the same furniture that concealed the espionage equipment he had discovered during his unauthorized search of her supposedly secure office space. "I trust you've had sufficient time to consider my proposal," Sarah began with the satisfied tone of someone who believed the outcome was predetermined by superior planning and overwhelming leverage. "Your daughter's safety depends on making the right choice, Mr. Rodriguez. I hope you understand that this opportunity for cooperation represents the best possible outcome for everyone involved in this delicate situation." Marco nodded thoughtfully, projecting the appearance of someone who had accepted defeat while actually initiating the most crucial phase of his counterintelligence mission. "I've given your offer careful consideration, and I believe cooperation would be in everyone's best interests. However, I need to understand exactly what kind of information you're seeking and how my reports would be used to address the security concerns you've identified." The questions were designed to elicit detailed responses about Sarah's intelligence requirements and operational procedures, information that would help federal prosecutors build a comprehensive case against her espionage network. Agent Hayes had coached him on interrogation techniques that encouraged subjects to reveal more information than they intended while believing they were maintaining control over the conversation. Sarah's responses exceeded the FBI team's most optimistic expectations, as she outlined specific classified projects she wanted monitored, particular employees whose access credentials she needed compromised, and detailed schedules for upcoming security vulnerabilities that would facilitate her theft of additional military technology. Her confidence in Marco's compliance made her careless about operational security, revealing connections to foreign handlers and timetables for intelligence transfers that the federal investigation had been unable to discover through conventional surveillance methods. The recording equipment concealed in Marco's security badge captured every incriminating detail while transmitting real-time intelligence to Agent Hayes and her team positioned throughout the Phoenix Tech building. Sarah's own sophisticated counter-surveillance measures, designed to detect traditional law enforcement equipment, failed to identify the military-grade technology that Marco's Special Forces contacts had provided for this specific operation. Over the following 2 weeks, Marco's double-agent role provided federal investigators with unprecedented access to Sarah's espionage activities, documenting money transfers, communication protocols, and the identities of other corporate executives who were unknowingly facilitating foreign intelligence operations. His security clearance allowed him to move freely throughout Phoenix Tech, while gathering evidence that revealed the full scope of classified technology theft that had been occurring for months. The most shocking discovery came when federal agents analyzing Marco's intelligence identified 3 other Phoenix Tech employees who were actively collaborating with Sarah's operation, including a senior research engineer who had been providing detailed specifications for advanced surveillance systems, and a financial executive who had been laundering payments through offshore accounts disguised as legitimate business transactions. Emma's protection remained Marco's primary concern throughout the dangerous weeks of evidence gathering, though she continued to view their life as reassuringly normal despite the invisible security measures that surrounded her daily activities. Federal agents posed as substitute teachers, maintenance workers, and neighborhood residents, creating multiple layers of protection while gathering additional intelligence about Sarah's surveillance capabilities and potential retaliation procedures. The breakthrough that would ultimately expose the entire espionage network came when Sarah instructed Marco to disable specific security protocols during an upcoming weekend when she planned to access Phoenix Tech's most classified research facilities. Her detailed instructions for compromising multiple security systems provided federal investigators with evidence of premeditated theft of military technology that carried severe penalties under national security statutes. Agent Hayes coordinated the final phase of the operation with military precision, positioning surveillance teams throughout Phoenix Tech, while Marco followed Sarah's instructions to disable security measures that would actually enhance rather than compromise the building's protective capabilities. The modified protocols would allow federal agents to monitor and record Sarah's theft activities while preventing her from accessing or transmitting any genuinely classified information. Marco understood that the coming weekend would determine whether months of dangerous undercover work would successfully expose Sarah's espionage network, or whether operational failures would leave Emma vulnerable to retaliation from foreign intelligence operatives who had invested years in developing their American assets. His Special Forces training had prepared him for high-stakes missions where success required perfect execution under intense pressure, but this operation carried personal stakes that exceeded anything he had faced during military service. The weight of protecting both his daughter and national security created pressures that tested every skill he had acquired during years of Special Forces operations. But Marco approached the final confrontation with the calm determination that had carried him through the most dangerous missions of his military career. Sarah Wellington's greatest mistake had been threatening Emma, transforming a security guard into an enemy operative whose protective instincts and tactical capabilities would ultimately destroy everything she had worked to achieve. The federal raid on Phoenix Tech Solutions occurred at precisely 6:15 a.m. on a crisp Tuesday morning as Sarah Wellington arrived for what she believed would be another routine day of corporate espionage disguised as executive leadership. FBI agents positioned throughout the building moved simultaneously, executing search warrants, while Marco provided real-time intelligence about Sarah's location and the security measures she had implemented to protect her classified operations. Sarah's arrest in her executive office was captured by the same surveillance equipment she had used to threaten Marco's cooperation, the hidden cameras recording her shock and fury, as Agent Hayes read federal charges that included conspiracy to commit espionage, theft of classified military technology, and violation of the Foreign Agents Registration Act. The irony wasn't lost on Marco that the woman who had threatened his daughter's safety was now facing life imprisonment for crimes against national security. The evidence Marco had gathered during weeks of dangerous undercover work proved devastating in federal court, with recordings of Sarah's detailed instructions for stealing classified technology and testimony about her threats against Emma providing prosecutors with an airtight case that resulted in convictions for the entire espionage network. The 3 Phoenix Tech employees who had collaborated with Sarah's operation received lengthy prison sentences, while foreign intelligence handlers identified through the investigation faced international sanctions and diplomatic consequences. But the most extraordinary reward came 3 months after Sarah's conviction, when Agent Hayes contacted Marco with an opportunity that would transform both his career and Emma's future in ways he had never imagined possible. The Department of Defense, impressed by his successful counterintelligence operation and his unique combination of special forces experience and corporate security knowledge, offered him a position as a civilian contractor specializing in identifying and neutralizing foreign intelligence threats against American technology companies. The salary was more than triple his security guard wages, with comprehensive benefits that included full college funding for Emma and relocation assistance to a secure residential community designed for federal employees and their families. Marco's new role would involve training corporate security teams, developing counterintelligence protocols, and conducting investigations similar to the operation that had exposed Sarah's espionage network. Emma's reaction to their move into a spacious house with a backyard and her own bedroom was pure joy, though she remained blissfully unaware of the dangerous circumstances that had made their improved life possible. She adapted quickly to her new school, making friends with children whose parents worked in similar federal positions and who understood the importance of discretion about family employment without requiring detailed explanations. The Phoenix Tech building, where Marco had once worked night security shifts, was transformed into a regional counterintelligence training center, with his former security station converted into a classroom where he taught federal agents and corporate executives how to identify the subtle signs of insider threats and foreign intelligence operations. His expertise, gained through months of deadly cat-and-mouse games with a professional spy, became invaluable training material for protecting American technology from future espionage attempts. 6 months after Sarah's conviction, Marco received a commendation from the Secretary of Defense, recognizing his exceptional service in protecting classified military technology and his courage in risking personal safety to expose foreign intelligence operations on American soil. The ceremony was small and private, attended only by Agent Hayes, Emma, and a handful of federal officials who understood the significance of his contribution to national security. Standing in the Pentagon ceremony room with Emma beside him, wearing her best dress and beaming with pride at her father's recognition, Marco reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed since that rain-soaked confrontation in the Phoenix Tech parking garage. Sarah Wellington's attempt to control him through threats against his daughter had ultimately provided the motivation and opportunity for him to build the secure, prosperous future that Emma deserved. The single father who had once struggled to balance security shifts with school pickup duties was now a respected federal contractor whose expertise protected American military personnel serving in combat zones around the world. Emma's college fund was fully secured, their home was in a safe community surrounded by neighbors who shared similar commitments to service, and Marco's work provided the sense of purpose and meaningful contribution that had been missing from his civilian life. As father and daughter walked out of the Pentagon together, Emma asked if his new job meant they would never have to worry about money again. Marco smiled, remembering the sleepless nights when he had calculated grocery budgets and worried about affording school supplies, and assured her that their future was more secure than he had ever dared to hope. Sarah Wellington's greatest mistake had been threatening the most important person in his world, not realizing that a father's love combined with special forces training would prove more powerful than any espionage operation she could devise. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.